Good morning, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar of AHK Eastern Africa, the delegation of German industry for Eastern Africa in Nairobi. I welcome you on behalf of all our team. My name is Maren Diala. I'm the head of the AHK office here in Eastern Africa. Technology is a game changer for all of us in the crisis time, and we at AHK have thus decided to start a webinar series on important topics for companies in general and also specifically in these COVID-19 times. Today is actually our first webinar in this series, and it's on German export credit guarantee and a pilot project that we here at AHK Eastern Africa are conducting since the end of last year on behalf of the German Federal Ministry for Economic Affairs and Energy. Our colleague, Eva Roesler, will lead you through the webinar, and I'll hand over to her very quickly. She's the head of the Competence Centre for German Export Credit Finance here in our office, and she also has two colleagues, one in Dubai and one in Singapore. She is responsible for Eastern Africa, but also supporting all of Sub-Sahara Africa if needed. The webinar series we have a special page for that on our website, www.kenya.ahk.de, and there you can find other upcoming webinars, and afterwards the presentation of this and other webinars that are conducted. Financing is a very big issue, especially for business with East Africa. A lot of companies see that as one of the vital parts of doing business, and we are very happy that in the past years a higher focus has been given to financing options for Africa, which at some time back was always seen as difficult and don't take care of that. That has changed very much, and we do not expect that to change through the COVID-19, but even get more focus on Africa. But enough of introduction from my side. I will now hand over to my colleague Eva, and she will lead you through the webinar and also explain about the house rules of this meeting, how we can communicate and all that. And I hope it's very insightful for you. Since we are a little bit improvising, you are now being turned with the screen to Eva, and she will take over. Enjoy the webinar.
Thank you very much, Maren. Good morning also from my side from Nairobi to all attendees, and thank you for joining today's webinar on German export credit guarantees and how they support your trade activities during the COVID-19 crisis. My name is Eva Roesler, and I'm the manager of the Competence Centre for German Export Finance. I'm located at the AHK in Kenya, the delegation of German Industry and Commerce for Eastern Africa, where we foster business relations between German and East African companies. Before we start, I wanted to inform you about some house rules for this webinar. Please kindly mute your microphones and put off the cameras. Please ask questions via the chat function. I will answer your questions after my presentation, and if this is not possible, please send me an email to be able to come back to you. Also, the presentation will be available on our website after the session. So let's dive into the subject. The coronavirus is on everybody's mind and affecting all of us and everything from production to supply and demand worldwide. Nobody is immune to the coronavirus impacts. To ease some of these impacts on your trade relations between Germany and East Africa, I will inform you about the support Euler Hermes, the German ECA, can provide. My presentation is directed to both exporters and importers. The program of today's webinar would be an input on Euler Hermes, the mandatory of the federal government, the framework cover and OECD roles, COVID-19 and Euler Hermes support, products and key takeaways. On the first slide, I want to show Euler Hermes and the Federal Republic of Germany that they promote export credit guarantees and untied loan guarantees to foster economic growth. Euler Hermes is the mandatory of the federal government. I will show you now some figures on Euler Hermes. Euler Hermes is active on behalf of the federal government since 1949 and combining the expertise of 400 employees. The overall volume of cover for the year 2019 was 21 billion euros and for Africa 2.95 billion euros. Euler Hermes is doing business with 1,600 exporters and banks. As a partner of German suppliers, Euler Hermes supports almost all industries and sectors, as you can see here on this slide. Engineering, social development, heavy equipment and renewables. How does the German export finance ecosystem look like? You see that the partners who work hand in hand would be the federal government, Euler Hermes, the German exporters, international banks, German banks, ECAs, export credit agencies, and the chambers of commerce. You also see the competence centers at the AHKs in Dubai, Nairobi, and Singapore. Since October last year, the competence centers are an addition for assisting customers. We are located in Asia, in the MENA region, and in Eastern Africa in my case. And we are here to discuss about projects and to facilitate finance solutions for both importers and exporters and also the banks. We are a project, as already mentioned by Mrs. Marindiale, created by the BMWI, the Federal Ministry of Economic Affairs and Energies, Euler Hermes and the AHK. I give you now an overview on the typical covers Euler Hermes can provide, from covering manufacturing risk during the production to supplier credit covers, buyer credit covers, bank guarantees and letter of credit covers to specific risk and supplementary covers. The function of the covers. So, a cover should protect your export transactions in difficult and high-risk markets against payment default for commercial or political reasons. The Hermes cover is only to be had where the private industry does not offer appropriate or even sufficient insurance cover, and consequently the federal government concentrates on export credit guarantees for emerging economies and developing countries. There's now a change. As in the COVID-19 times, there's a change, so also OECDs and European countries can be covered during the COVID-19 times. Hermes cover is here to help to open up markets which are difficult to access and to also maintain business relations in these challenging circumstances. The Hermes cover is here to help you to cover commercial and political risks, meaning that, for example, a political risk could be that the country you're working with is having a war or armed conflicts, and these political measures could be covered, and also the commercial risk that would be the insolvency of the borrower or suspension of the payments. There's always, very important, an uninsured part, which is between 5 and 15% that you have to take over. And as you might have heard about the compact with Africa in since I think it's since 2017-18, there's also the possibility to reduce this uninsured part for Compact with Africa countries to 5%. I will talk about 2 Compact with Africa countries later. picture also in our East African region. What does now an export credit guarantee cost in the moment when you ask for cover? So the policy holder would pay a processing fee and a risk-based premium in returning for receiving this cover. The amount of this premium is depending on mostly three factors, which is the duration of the contract, which is the OECD risk category of the importing country. The risk is between 1 and 7, the buyer's credit rating, and also on the currency. Very important to note that the EC premiums are harmonized under the USCD rules, so the country risks are determined by the USCD export committee, should be payable upfront as a flat fee, and can also be financed under an ECA facility. What is this USCD consensus? It's an arrangement on officially supported export credit terms for all transactions with a tenure of more than 2 years. The rules would be that the credit that you can ask for is 85% of the order value. So you should do the advance payment of 15%. You can include local costs, which is more or less 23% of the total order value. Very important is the 49+ rule of the German government in this case. The payment terms would be equal installments, and the starting point of the payment is at latest 6 months after delivery of the goods or after commissioning. There are also rules governing the minimum interest rates and the minimum premiums on the basis, as I mentioned before, country and buyer risk and eventual collateral. And additionally also the horizon, which is the tenor sector category. Very important to note, because I have been asked by some of the companies that I was talking to, this risk for countries cannot be changed by any export credit agency on its own. It always has to be via an OECD consensus. So very important also just to mention again that the objective of the USCD consensus is that all exporters have like the same level and get the same official support for the export credit guarantees. Now I want to show you actually our East African risk category, so the East African countries that I'm taking care of, Uganda, Kenya, Ethiopia, Tanzania, Rwanda, but also as mentioned before, I help with all countries in the East African regions whenever you have questions and would like to discuss projects. But in this case, you can see that the countries on our side, let's say, are actually between 6 and 7 risk, which means these are the higher risk countries. And therefore, the premium would also be higher than logically in 3 or 4 risk country. Next slide, I want to go into some of the countries in Eastern Africa that also at the AHK we take care of. So the first country is actually country risk 7, which is the highest risk. But Ethiopia is a compact with Africa country, so there would be a reduction of the uninsured portion possible. You can do short-term business, so there's no formal restrictions on cover. When you decide on medium or long-term business, there are cover facilities available, always on a case-by-case basis. And very important, when you do transactions with public buyers, you should also get a guarantee from the Ministry of Finance or the central bank to cover the risk. So my next country would be Kenya. Short-term business, no formal restrictions. Medium, long-term business, also cover facilities available on case-by-case basis. You can always focus on project finance or other structured finance deals, and collateral is normally not required if it's less than 360 days. But in general, guarantees from the Ministry of Finance or the central bank are also required if you focus on medium or long-term contracts with public buyers. Similar Rwanda, compact with Africa countries, so you can also get a reduction of the uninsured portion to 5% as a compact with Africa country. Similar short-term business, no formal restrictions, medium, long-term, case-by-case basis. And also, if you do transaction with public buyers, you need the guarantee of the Ministry of Finance or the central bank. Tanzania, actually a kind of similar situation, case-by-case basis for medium long-term, no restrictions on short-term business. In this case, you will see that for credit transactions with public buyers, the uninsured percentage under the cover is 10%. This cannot be so easily reduced except not even with the supplier credit, so it's also always 10%. Collateral, also Ministry of Finance, central bank required, but nevertheless, whenever you have something that you want to work on or if you want to discuss on, we can have a deeper look on it. Uganda, also country risk 6, no formal restrictions on cover for short term, medium long term, case by case, and if you are figuring on medium long-term transaction with public buyers, always guarantee from the Ministry of Finance or the central bank. Nevertheless, you will see that the cover volume in sub-Saharan Africa is quite interesting. The top countries last year, 2019, would be Kenya in the 3rd position and Uganda in the 5th position, and Tanzania would be 9th position. So the volumes are actually saying that there's interest and there are possibilities to do business projects and ask for also finance support. Now we go to actually the part which I believe is the most interesting for you, COVID-19 and how Euler Hermes can support your activities in Eastern Africa. In the next slide, I wanted to show you how the volume and transaction increased during and after the financial crisis 2008 and 2009. You can see the single transaction and whole turnover policies had coming up between 2008 and 2012-13, let's say. And we have also to say, or some analysts say, that this crisis might now surpass the 2008-9 financial crisis with a very harsh impact on the global economic performance. There will be different phases after the lockdowns for opening the global markets again, and only step by step. So there will be a big impact on the global economy. This is why I want to show you how Euler Hermes will support you in the COVID-19 crisis. So very important, Euler Hermes instruments are still available, even in these times. And Euler Hermes will still provide cover against commercial and political risks. Also, the risk perspective from Euler Hermes remains unchanged. So the risk analysis would be to see the last 3 annual reports or financials, and also Euler Hermes will have a look at the track record of the buyer, meaning that the company that applies for financing in Hamburg, the colleagues are aware that during the COVID-19 there might be an influence on the revenues, and so they take in consideration the track records of the company before the crisis. There are different instruments to provide cover from the manufacturing period to the period after delivery, and Euler Hermes and the Federal Republic of Germany will do the decisions as quickly as possible for you to go forward with your trade contract. Also, there has been created a task force to provide legal support for the guaranteed transaction during the crisis. How can your activities now be supported? So you can see here the partners on this slide would be the exporter, the importer, definitely a bank, and the government guarantee. So very important is that the support to the German exporters and their banks will be by insurance or guarantees. Euler Hermes enable the banks to benefit from the AAA rating of the Federal Republic, and this limits the bank's capital requirements and therefore is freeing up lines for you as an importer. Very important, I mentioned it shortly before, you are required to have a partial, let's say, German sourcing as a core prerequisite to access to the cover. Very important, I think in these times, one of the products that a lot of exporters and even importers might have a look at is the supplier cover. I will explain the system to you with an example. Imagine you're an exporter and you are negotiating a contract with the prospect, with the buyer abroad. And you agree on the product, you agree on the specifics of the product, you agree on the timeline, etc. But when you come to discuss the payment arrangements, your future purchaser is asking for a credit period, for example, 12 months for the payment. And with the supplier cover, the exporter can actually cover the risk of the unpayment of this commercial loan that he gives to his purchaser and discuss the payment terms in a more comfortable way in this case. And the exporter, the seller, can also, as he might need the liquidity of the payment for not having to wait until the transfer has arrived, 12 months, can discount it at your local bank because the cover would be guaranteed by the German state with AAA rating. So this is very helpful in a crisis to be able to go on with business, and it's actually possible for all amounts. Here you see the supplier credit cover structure. As I mentioned before, you have the commercial contract between the importer and the exporter, and you enter into the contract. The buyer pays a 15% down payment. Hermes would issue the insurance or guarantee for the benefit of the exporter. Then the exporter in point 3 delivers the goods and services, completes the project. And upon completion of the project, the buyer starts the repayment. Very important, the part A refinancing, that you as an exporter, you can enter with your bank into a forfeiting contract to get the amount of the rising claims under the supplier credit guarantee in advance. So next slide, the financing for buyers, similar but different to the previous example is the buyer credit. Instead of exporter offering the finance and terms, a bank would do the financing, and actually as well here you have the commercial contract, you have the down payment of 15%, and the bank who is interested in financing the transaction would finance 85% of the loan, or 85%, sorry, of the amount of your contract. And advantage is that you as an exporter would get this 85% immediately from the bank, and obviously very important, the cover of the German state that would cover the bank for the risk that the bank takes, because the bank would finance your importer directly. Different banks are, like say, very interested in offering this buyer credit. The amounts where you can ask for a buyer credit vary depending on the bank. There are institutions that can also already discuss smaller amounts, and some banks would be happy to finance roughly between 8 and 10 million euros. Other banks would maybe even have a look at smaller amounts, less than 3 million. The advantage this financing for importers or the buyer credit for the importer would be that you have an access to attractive long-term US dollar and euro financing at a competitive pricing. That means that it's better or more attractive rates than you would have in a commercial loan with maybe local banks. You have an interesting tenor of 5 to 10 years or even longer if you have a sustainable energy project or purchase in mind. And the premium that I was mentioning before, which is the premium to cover the risk, can also be additionally financed. So the 85% of the finance plus the premium could be covered under the ECA facility. The exporter has the advantage, if there is a buyer credit involved, that he does not have to take over the payment risk of the importer. This would be done by the ECA, and he has a competitive advantage for the financing. He will get the cash or the payment immediately, so he has immediate liquidity, and he doesn't have to negotiate on the finance terms, so his balance sheet as of the immediate receiving of the cash payment is also improving. A very important part or a very important, let's say, finance possibility would be project finance, which is the financing of a project that you are creating in, let's say, in a market in Africa. You would have to fund a special purpose company, which would be the credit holder and the applicant for the loan, and Euler Hermes would support your project during all cycles. So, for example, a wind energy project, a high-speed rail project, hydropower, solar parks, there you have the possibility to apply for a project finance, and Euler Hermes is here to help you with the structuring, with agreements, with the construction, implementation and running of the project. But what is very important in this case is that you have to, let's say, provide all the legal, technical, market and commercial input on it. So all the project risks have to be taken in consideration, environmental, and you have to provide the due diligence reports and technical reports to be able to get an analysis of this project finance done. The finance analysis or the risk analysis is based on the future income of this special purpose company, meaning that in the moment you create the company, you have to focus on the future income that you will create with, for example, a hydropower project, and this income is then the base of the repayment. So you don't have to bring any kind of additional balance sheets from members or holders of this SPC. This is all focused on the future income. As I said, the average amount for this project analysis would be roughly 50 million euros, but there's also the possibility to have a look on smaller amounts. Very important for an exporter in this complicated COVID-19 crisis times would be the manufacturing risk insurance that I also want to show you today. This insurance provides protection against financial consequences of a production stoppage. So in the case that, for example, because of the coronavirus situation, that it's not reasonable to continue production or to arrange shipment of goods, or even that your customer is not able to continue to comply with the export contract, then you would have a cover. Sometimes, and this is also very important to mention, that if consequent government actions caused by the COVID-19 pandemic would not be considered political risk events, but the right to a claim might arise due to the commercial cover. That means that the buyer's obligation under the contract are still valid. So if there's no force majeure clause, then you have the right to ask for the covered amount. Very important, in the moment when your buyer is already making signs that he's unable to continue the contract, you have to inform your Euler Hermes contact immediately, and to take care that all is under the umbrella for you to get the cover, to talk immediately with the colleagues in Hamburg or even with us here at the competence centers. Why are the export credit guarantees so important during the crisis times? So actually, for exporters and banks, the federal government offers extensive protection, especially for the risk of debt default of the customers, which would be your importers. Very important that existing guarantees are not limited or will not be cancelled because of the COVID-19. And as I mentioned before, it is very important to ensure that the payment obligations are still decisive and that there's no force majeure clause in your export contract, which you have to check. Very important that the procurement risk, who bears it if the subcontractors cannot deliver on time due to unforeseen circumstances. Can all exports now be covered? Definitely. Exports of German registered companies can still be covered if the criteria of eligibility for the promotion and risk is justified. This has to be checked and approved for each individual case during the application procedure. The economic impact of the COVID-19 crisis may play an important role in this context, but the government will ensure that enough funds for granting cover will be available to support your exports or the financing provided for an export transaction. So this is one of my last slides, actually, the key takeaways, and I think I was quicker than I thought. Very important, Euler Hermes provides cover for political and commercial risks, even in these complicated times. The risk policy remains unchanged. Euler Hermes is a reliable partner, especially during and after crisis. There are a variety of products to support exporters and importers, as you have seen, and the export credit guarantees are important also to implement a financing structure which will benefit the buyers. And my colleagues in Hamburg, or also the financing experts in Dubai, Nairobi and Singapore, we are here to support you. So please do not hesitate in contacting us. Voila. Very, very important slide. Last slide, as always. If you have questions, doubts, for more information, please visit the www.agaportal.de site, where you get a lot of information. And also please contact myself at the Competence Centre for German Export Finance. You see here my telephone number, you see my email address, and I'm really here for you for talking about projects. If you have doubts, for talking about finance solutions, finance possibilities, or for just give you an input on situation, projects, and any trade possibilities that you're interested in. Thank you very much for now. I don't know if there are any questions. Okay, so there are two questions that I might now read. Okay, so I will read it loud. The repayment starts after 6 months or after commissioning. Yes, so this is the question. The repayment starts after 6 months after commissioning. So how exactly does this work in our project building, solar, as time frames are depending on the actual finishing of the projects to produce income. Okay, Mr. Blinne, if I can, thank you very much for this interesting question. In this case, this is the focus on an import-export contract, so that it's 6 months after installment exactly. If it's a project finance, and I believe the question is more on a project finance, then there would be a different analysis. But nevertheless, we can talk about that on email, because I think we have our email contact, so we can have a look at that. Next question. Do you have a breakdown of cost by sector of the 2019 investment in Kenya? I don't get the question. I have to say that. Do you have a breakdown of cost of what? Of the premium fees of the, I don't know what this question means, I have to say. So maybe you could send me an email and give me a bit more on input on that question, because I'm not now sure if I understand it. Okay, so no, please kindly, you see my email address here on the screen, so kindly send me an email in the moment when there are some doubts that you still have, and I'm really happy to answer your questions. You can also reach me on the phone, but as I said, I'm not so sure if I get them, if I will be able to give the right answer, because I don't understand the question. Sorry for that. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I was quicker than I thought, and but I'm very happy that you had time to listen and that you were interested in that subject. As Mrs. Marandiale said, very important to talk about financing. There are 2 more questions that I have seen now. What do you mean when you say private companies would require collateral in form of bank guarantee when asking for short medium? Okay, so this is, I believe, in reference to the country slides that I showed you and the risks. Private companies would require collateral in form, I can see it, of bank guarantee when asking for short medium. So first of all, I would like to know which country we are talking about, and if it's a short or a medium, let's say finance or support or cover that you're asking for, then I can give you a more detailed answer. So kindly, Mr. Valid, send me also an email, so I'm very happy to answer this question in detail. So your next question, for short term, here it goes on. For renewable energy, would you finance up to project balance sheet? And it depends. We can have a look on a 30 million based project balance sheet application. No problem. We can have a look at that. We can talk about that. Sorry, I thought it was just it was 2 questions, but it was one actually divided in 2. So you can send me an email. I'm very happy to answer that question. We can discuss whenever you wish. Perfect. No other questions? Okay, so there are no other questions. So thank you very much again for your interest and for listening.